Do you see what they're saying there? Now, let's think about the statements there and ask ourselves the question, is this a biblical form of church government? And if so, what does it tell us about how the church is to be led and to be governed? First of all, they say that the church, in respect to Christ, the head and king of the church, and the sovereign power residing in Him and exercised by Him, the church is a monarchy. In other words, the church bows the knee to her king. Correct? That's what a monarchy does. Look at Ephesians chapter 1, verse 22. And He, that is God, has put all things under His, that is Christ's feet, and gave Him as head over all things to the church. As the head of the church, He is the ultimate authority in all things pertaining to the church. And I like the language of a monarchy. I like the language of Him being king of the church. You know, we were brought up in a branch of landmarkism where we were taught that Christ was not the king of the Gentiles yet. You know, that He was not the king of redeemed Gentiles. We were taught that He was not our king. And when I discovered that He was, you know, that kind of increased my tendency to bow my knee. You understand what I'm saying, Dave? So there is a sense in which Christ is the head over the church, is the supreme authority within the church. And literally all authority within the church outside of that is subservient to His headship and His kingship as head of the church. The second statement there in that Cambridge platform says, in respect to the body or the brotherhood of the church or the congregation of the church at large, and power from Christ granted unto them, it resembles a democracy. Now remember the passage we just looked at? Who decided whether the man here in 2 Corinthians was accepted back into the membership or not? The majority. Okay? It was the prerogative of the majority of the church to decide whether he was allowed to be a member again or whether he was to continue in his excommunication. I mean, there you have the basic functioning principles of a democracy. But if you go back to the book of Matthew chapter 18, remember it was the church that had the final say and the final authority in the dispute between two where one had sinned against the other. Remember, you appeal to him privately, then you appeal to him in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, and then appeal to the church. And if he doesn't hear the church is the final court of appeal, the final authority. So there is a sense in which there resides within the church an element of democracy. But if we don't balance that out against the headship of Christ and the gifts of leadership that Christ places within the church, we make shipwreck of church government, and we do so quickly. The third point is that in respect to the presbytery, that is the elders, the presbytery and power committed unto them, it is an aristocracy. And I'll let that word scare you. That was used in the context that there are those within the church who are appointed by God to rule and to exercise leadership within the church. Now, is that biblical? Well, 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 17, Paul tells young Timothy, he said, let the elders who what? Rule well, be considered worthy of double honor, especially those who labor in preaching and in teaching. So clearly, according to the Apostle Paul, there is this element of rule and leadership that is vested in the presbytery or in the elders and the leaders of the church. So you see the trichotomy of authority that exists in the church. You have the overarching authority of Jesus Christ as the King and the head of the church, under which every other authority is to submit to that supreme authority and leadership. But then you have the authority of the democratic vote of the church in certain matters, such as discipline and church membership and the settling of disputes and so on and so forth. But then in addition to that, you have a rule or an authority vested in the elders or the presbytery of the church. So, when we think about the way that was laid out in that document, I can't help but go back. Do you see the balance of that? Do you see the checks and balances that are literally built into that? First of all, you have the inerrant word of Christ that's the overarching authority. Then you have authority vested dually in the church body and in leadership, but both of those being subject to the check and balance of each other and the authority of Jesus Christ as set forth in His Word. Does that remind you of any form of government with which you're familiar? Yeah, the one we used to have. Okay, let's flesh through this just a little bit. We started out with a republican form of government in which there were three branches. Name the three branches of our government. Legislative and judicial. Executive branch, the legislative branch, the judicial branch. But then there was the democratic element of the people at large being able to cast their vote in determining direction. You see the checks and balances that are built in there? Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Tyrannically take control. Yeah. That's right.
So if we as congregation don't do our homework as Brother King would say, and we don't know that we all have to fall under that monarchy.
That's right. We all bow the knee to the king.
That's right. So it takes an informed.
That's right. That's right. That's exactly right. Which, if you stop and think about it, if the leadership and the elders are doing their job, then the people will be informed. And that's the way it's supposed to work.
Well, I was going to say, we've become a democracy in that we've thrown out the original monarchy. We've thrown out the Constitution, and we've become a democracy.
Yeah.
We should be a republic. A republic has a set of rules, and you go by those rules
Right.
within the confines of voting.
Yeah, but we can't be slowed down by that. We're too busy reshaping the rule book to be slowed down by that. Right.
At this point, you guys, does anybody know what an oligarchy is? An oligarchy is one on the verge on if we're not already there. That is we're going to be ruled by a few
Elite. The elite.
elite group.
Yeah.
Okay? There may be one figurehead to represent them, but it's still going to be an elite group behind the scenes of that individual. And that, when I think about church government, I can see churches falling into that. You know what I'm talking about, Dan? There's this elite group in the church, the contributors, for example, who
Right.
always get their way. And the pastor will be their representative as long as he
Right.
agrees with them. The minute that happens, he can be kicked out.
Get
Somebody
it.
got control of it.
Get somebody in there that they can control.
That same oligarchy, but see, within the church, within government, it all flows into this, what happens when sinfulness begins to decide what self wants.
Yeah.
If we are a selfish group,
Yeah.
we as individuals of this church are selfish and want just what we want,
Mm-hmm.
we will end up in that.
That's exactly
Those
right.
with the most power, influence,
Right.